Okay, we have it going, and we have
All right,
Pastor Billy. You got your mic unmuted, I see.
I did.
Bubba, who missed us a couple weeks, is now in fold. It looks like for some more debauchery tonight. I guess debauchery is what we do. Debauchery.
Depends on who you ask, I guess.
Well, for some, in the case of me, I guess it would be blasphemy, right? Maybe not debauchery. Yeah.
That'd be interesting to know if somebody called that blasphemy. I guess I think of blasphemy, somebody who it would seem odd that somebody who doesn't believe in God would be able to blaspheme God if you don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, there's people out there. They're going to be like, "Well, you turned away,
Well, yeah,
therefore,
that's true.
it's like
Okay, you
yeah,
win.
I'm a blasphemer." That's fine though, because if I get there to the pearly gates, Billy, and God says, "What did you do in this world?" and I'll say, "Well, listen, I didn't do shit, but I did at least try to put one of your servants in front of some people in my community, and maybe don't send me to full hell, send me to like half hell."
And no, what's the word I was looking for? Ah, shoot! I hate when I come up with words and I can't use them. No, let's move on.
Let's move on. Yes, we have many words to say today. No, I don't want to watch you debauch, Bubba. I've seen you debauch. Bubba every now and then attends. Actually, Bubba is one of the very first attendees of my musical performances over the years. He caught me in the early days. He was working at the bowling alley that was near the Italian Market and Grill. And we had some times back then. We were young and dumb and other things.
What city is the Italian Market and Grill in?
It's nowhere now. It's nowhere now. It used to be in just West Knoxville. It was a place.
So Family Bowl or
Yeah. It was Family Ball. His bowling alley was Family Ball. Yeah, it was. I guess it was just the same family as Starlight Lanes. They kind of have all the same systems. I guess I don't know. Probably.
Well, Family Bowl is when I did most of my bowling at.
Yeah, I mean, this was the Family Bowl that you're talking about. Yeah, so Bubba worked there, right, Bubba? Maybe he'll be able to answer for us instead of we can just move on. But anyway, so he and a bunch of the crew from the Family Bowl would come to see me on Monday nights at Italian Market and Grill, which was, I still to this day don't understand how that worked, because Italian Market and Grill was a place that you would take your prom date. And they were calling me,
It's like you're playing at Chesapeake's, right?
It was sort of like that, right?
Or Altruda's, maybe playing in Altruda's.
No, Altruda's would do it differently, because I know Paul very well, and Paul, his son and I played some guitar together, Anthony, and but no, Italian Market and Grill was like a place that you would take your prom date. But years later, they had fallen on hard times and were looking for a way to get new sales, and they decided to do a Monday night, like service industry night, where people from restaurants and bars would, because Monday night is server weekend, server bartender weekend, and they would come to my show on Monday and they would debauch. Yeah, OCI was down that way at that time. Of course, OCI was originally on the Strip. So
where are you playing this week coming up?
So tomorrow I'm at Suttrie's downtown on Gay Street, and then Thursday I'm at Wild Wing Cafe in Powell. Friday I'm actually going. This is this week, yeah. What's that? I'm sorry. What?
I was going to say this week coming up is the next week. So Monday, do you play Monday?
The next week. I'm sorry. I'm talking. Well, let me just tell you about this week then.
Go ahead.
Wednesday is my standing show at Suttrie's, so that's every Wednesday. Thursday is my standing show at Wild Wing Cafe. Then Saturday, I have a place called Naughty K's. Naughty K's is a place up Alcoa Highway run by Kim, who's a good friend of ours. She has been voted the Knoxville's best bartender for years and years and years, and finally she decided, I'm just going to open my own bar, and I play there from time to time. So
just a bar with bar food, or do they have?
Well, it's Naughty K's. The theme is I don't want to listen. Bar food ain't bar food no more. If you know what you're talking about.
Well, I don't go to bars. I go to restaurants that have bars. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be bar food was bar food. Now, like if you go to Naughty K's, I would dare not call it bar food. It's a good menu. That doesn't mean you couldn't get a burger there. You know, you can. And we have the lovely wife in.
She loves it.
Commentary. And then, so we have that Saturday, and then Sunday is my first Cheers at Chodo show of the year, which I will be doing on Sundays this year, every other Sunday. And then I have a bunch of Aspire gigs on Sundays through the summer. And then there's other places I'm playing, like Clinch River Brewery, and I can't think of it offhand, all of them. But there's
got anything Monday and Tuesday?
Well, Monday and Tuesday, I reserve for Tuesday for sure. I reserve for the Pastor and Atheist show. I don't know if you've heard of it. And
I'm starting to
register what you do on Tuesday nights. And then Monday was supposed to be the unveiling of the new venue of my game show, the J. Luke Land Party. But it is not going to be that now. So we're going to rework that idea. Yep. What's up, Jerome? All right, so we are, speaking of Kristi's videos, thank you, Jerome. We are going to, it was a perfect segue. We're going to go ahead and start up. We have been watching the first two videos. We didn't make it through the second video all the way through. We got distracted twice now. One, and this last one was on free will. Which
maybe we should call this an atheist and a pastor go down rabbit holes.
Oh boy, yes, we are.
An atheist, a pastor, and a rabbit hole.
Yes, we just call us Alice, right?
Two guys, a girl, and a.
We got you. We got you on YouTube, Ed. This time around, I fixed it. We don't have the crazy sounds. Much thanks to Mr. Ed, who is not Mr. Ed the horse, but Ed Wrong Latitude on the chat. For helping me with some sound issues that I was having we're working this out. Jessica says I need to make a frame where we get our faces up real big on the screen, and then I pull them out as we are not talking. And I just don't know if she realized I only have two hands. So, anyway. Excuse me. Let's move on to Kristi Burke here, and let's see what she's got to say about Christian Reconstructionism, and onto the Satanic Panic, which I just learned that Billy has never heard of the phrase Satanic Panic, which shocked me. But moving on. Oh. Thanks, manager. No sound. That's because I didn't do the proper things I was supposed to do. My bad. Hold on. I can fix that real quick. Bang.
Hello, friends, and welcome back. The last time you saw me, we were in the middle of a deep dive on Christian nationalism. And in the last episode, I was talking about the rise of the religious right in the mid-century and how these fears of atheism and communism and godlessness were really fueling that rise of the religious right. The American people were being primed to be afraid of this
Luke, you're not sharing it with
threat
me,
of
so I can't hear it.
communism.
Oh,
And they
son
were
of a
being
gun! I am. Yeah, here we go.
And I had my mic muted for some reason.
So
and
I was bragging about how I'm getting my stuff together, and it's 100% not true.
I was talking to a guy that was at church late Sunday. He got there late, and he said, we were on our way. Everything was going great. And then we just felt like we were going to be early, and they're never early. And I said, well, that's where you got in trouble. So you started getting cocky about being early.
Yeah, that's right. All right, guys. Again, sorry, we're gonna start it again.
I have video, and I believe I'll have sound.
I think you will.
Hello, friends, and welcome back. The last time you saw me, we were in the middle of a deep dive on Christian nationalism. And in the last episode, I was talking about the rise of the religious right in the mid-century and how these fears of atheism and communism and godlessness were really fueling that rise of the religious right.
That was a big bite of apple, Billy.
Primed to be afraid of this external threat of communism, and they were being told that the reason this threat existed was because of atheism. Atheism caused communism, and communism is hurting people, and it's collapsing societies, and it's coming for us next. And so we have to get right with God in order to fight it. And any of your Americans, your fellow Americans who aren't getting right with God and who are living these sinful, feminist, queer, whatever lifestyles, they are going to be the reason that communism comes over here and we fall to it. So we have to fight against it. And so the war was waged not on external threats. I mean, it was, our politics were, our government was, but as far as the everyday average American person, they were waging war on their fellow Americans.
Okay, just real quickly, for those of us who are in the chat that are maybe behind a little bit on our podcasts, this is section 3 of this lady's videos on Christian nationalism, and she has already detailed some things that maybe she isn't clear here with, right? Like in earlier videos, she has linked communism and atheism and like a move to secularism as being the Christian nationalist movement has linked communism and atheism, right?
And socialism too.
And socialism and all that the systems that help people, right? Or at least they're designed to in that way, or nonetheless, the point that she had made in previous videos is that atheism and communism are related, and it is funny because we have made many comments on how Jesus himself probably wouldn't have been the best capitalist, right?
Right.
So, anyway.
And they were pointing their fingers and saying, you don't fit the mold of a white, traditional Christian American. And because of that, you are a threat. You could fall to communism. You might be a communist. There are these like manufactured culture wars that we still see today. They never stopped. And the goal is to keep us all fighting with one another, distracted, so that we don't actually turn our sights on the very real issues, which are authoritarian regimes, dictatorships, people who don't like democracy, things like that, political leaders. So the goal is to get us to all fight with one another, wage war on one another. And it worked. We did. And then by the end of the Cold War, when things started dying down, a lot of people realized, I guess the gay people weren't the problem. I guess the black people weren't the problem. And so, we talked about that the last episode and talked about these evangelical leaders that were going around the country and galvanizing evangelical support, and how they really seemed fueled by their own desires, their own goals, more so than this desire to see a more moral or happier, healthier society.
Follow the money.
Was making a lot of money, a lot
Yep.
of money. He was very tied up in the political world. He was gaining power and status. Jerry Falwell was making a ton of money.
Follow the
He was
smell.
also losing his tax exempt status for his segregated schools, and he didn't like that. So he created this fight against the federal government, saying the federal government is overreaching and it's doing too much and it's getting in our business and our religious freedom is at stake and we need to fight. It's fear. We're scared of godlessness. We're scared of our fellow Americans, and we're scared of the federal government. And so we have a solution. Pray, get right with God, listen to our television programming, listen to our radio programming, and we will help you find the right way to live, the right way to fight this. But it seemed as though they didn't really hold a lot of the values that they were preaching, at least not at first. If you remember in the last episode,
Jim
Jerry
Swaggart.
Falwell didn't start fighting.
What's that?
Jimmy Swaggart.
Yeah. What's your comment on that?
Well, Jimmy Swaggart was one that, his big issue that he really fought against was homosexuality, and he had all this constant statements about it, and then was caught in a homosexual act, meeting with I don't remember if it was a male prostitute or if it was somebody he was having an affair with. I can't remember that far back. And, he was railing against the thing that he was participating in.
Right. But there's some self-hate in that probably.
Yeah, I'm sure that.
Yeah.
Against Roe v. Wade until like 6 or 7 years after it was passed. There was something happening underneath the surface, these kind of fringe extremist ideologies that were very kind of quiet, but they were working their way up, and they were kind of infiltrating the minds of these evangelical leaders, these political leaders who needed more causes to fight. You have to remember, if these people didn't have a fear to feed you, then they didn't have a solution to offer. And without the solution, they have nothing. They can't make their money. They can't get radio listeners. They can't get people at their rallies. They have to give you a reason to adopt their solution, their ideologies. And you have to first be afraid in order to adopt it. So it brings me to Christian Reconstruction.
So we see this in advertising. Think of the Ron Popeils and what's that guy that screamed at everybody all the time, that those infomercial type people. They show people, oh, you got all these wires you can't handle, and make it as bad as possible, and nobody ever experiences it the way they show it. It's always worse than, here's the problem you've got to overcome. If you buy our product, we'll get you over it.
Sure. We were discussing this before we got on about how fear is like, if you're a sales manager, you're telling your sales agents to sell a little fear. It's effective.
And it doesn't even have to be actual fear. It just has to be, it could be that bad. Okay, if it could be that bad, why don't even I'll avoid that by buying this product. I'll go down this path instead of that path.
Would you you don't employ fear in your messaging, do you? I mean,
nobody would believe me if I did.
Nobody would believe you if you did. People believe in fear.
I know they do, but they don't believe in it from me.
They don't believe in it. They wouldn't believe this. Wouldn't be. They would have had. What you're saying is they would have heard your preaching, right, and would be like, this just doesn't sound like Billy at all. Somebody has kidnapped him, and this is an alien in a cloned body.
Right.
Hey, so Bubba said that communism is religionless, so Jesus is more like a socialist. And then you said communalism would be more descriptive of Jesus.
Yeah. The concept of communism, of course, didn't exist in the time of Christ. That was not what they would have practiced.
Yeah.
But also, he wasn't really about governing.
Right.
That's the main thing. He wasn't really about governing. He was about, even the early church, which lived, sell all you have and share together and all that, which is it implies communism in that sense. But communalism, they would live in commune with one another, but it wasn't really about a system of governance.
Gotcha.
I don't know if we could say with any authority whether Jesus would adopt any of the three, democracy or communism or socialism. I don't know that he would address that. Certainly he was opposed to authoritarianism because that's who took him out.
Right. So Ed wants to know, what do you preach happens to non-believers?
I don't preach about that a lot. First off, I'm more motivated to try to teach people to offer grace and figuring out what's right for them, finding a path for themselves, and that means loving your neighbor. It means loving God first. It means developing, working on justice for people. I'm a Wesleyan, and one of the things that we talk about is the idea that there are kind of four quadrants of Christian life. That if you're focused on these four areas, then you're working on being a better disciple of Christ. And those four areas are personal devotion and worship, which are communal devotion in one sense. So personal devotion is your own personal time, going out in the woods and being with God, prayer, study, that kind of stuff that you do on your own. Whereas corporate worship or communal worship, doing the worship aspect of things with God, with other people, with the body of Christ. Then the other parts are showing mercy. So if
when you say body of Christ, you're talking about the congregation.
Yes, all Christians would be a part of the body of Christ.
Okay, got you.
And then the next area is mercy. So that's Matthew 25, right? If people are hungry, you feed them. If somebody's naked, you clothe them. That kind of thing. So if somebody needs help, you try to help them. And then there's acts of justice, and that is, why are these people hungry? What can we do? What can we change in the system to help people not be hungry anymore? And you might have noticed what's missing in that is judgment of people. It's not my place to decide whether somebody is Christian or it's not my place to decide whether somebody goes to heaven or not. It's my place to offer them a better vision or a vision.
Right. So I think Ed's focused on
Ed is wrong latitude.
Yeah.
So Ed, I would say this. There's one of the major differences. So I had this friend in college. He was a Baptist, and I'm a United Methodist, and we had this debate for all 5 years that I was there, because sometimes you take longer in college, and we were trying to decide what's the difference between Baptist and Methodist. And there's all kinds of theological differences. One in particular is our theological understanding of what baptism is. But in the end, what we came to was this, that there are churches that spend all of their time trying to get people to come to the altar, and then there are churches that spend all of their time trying to figure out what to do once someone comes to the altar. And I'm more of the latter. I'm more focused on because let me be honest, most of the people in most churches are people who either grew up in that church or already. Few people are coming to churches and making a profession of faith. A lot of people may do it because they've come to a new church. In some denominations, you can't join their church unless you make a profession of faith. It doesn't matter whether you already. So, for me, I spend more time on the goal is the kingdom of heaven, is the words that Jesus used, and he said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So how can we make the world we live in better? That's the goal to me.
So you're saying that basically, don't concern yourself with the reward, concern yourself with the deeds.
Yeah, concern yourself with the life that you've been called to live.
Well, I mean, the Methodists are the eaters, from what I understand, Bubba.
Well, he's Bubba. My church starts at 10:30 so that we get out in time.
Oh my goodness! All right. Let's before we get too caught into like Billy's specific. I do want to eventually go down the path of just like, kind of understanding more how the Methodist Church might work eventually. But I think that we're in terms of Kristi here. Kristi Burke. She's talking about evangelical Baptist Calvinist type stuff. I think the dichotomy's fun, to talk about the two. But right now, I think I would more like to focus on what she's saying as opposed to going down that path of what Billy specifically teaches as a Methodist. So let's
Right.
I mean, don't get the wrong impression. Obviously, I want your opinion. I just want to see if we can maybe stay focused.
I agree. I'm with
So if you
you.
don't know what that is, Christian Reconstructionism is a fundamentalist Calvinist theonomic movement. It developed primarily under the direction of R.J. Rushdoony, who we'll talk about.
Hold
in a
on.
minute.
We need to rewind just a second or two.
is,
So
Christian
she's defining Christian Reconstructionism, right, in this portion right here. The specific two words, Christian Reconstruction.
Is a fundamentalist Calvinist theonomic movement. It
Theonomic.
developed primarily under the direction of R.J. Rushdoony, who we'll talk about in a minute, Greg Bahnsen and Gary North. And it has an important influence over the Christian right in the United States. Reconstructionists advocate for the theonomy and the restoration of certain biblical laws. These include the death penalty, not only for murder, but for idolatry, homosexuality, adultery, witchcraft, and blasphemy. There was this book that was put out in 1973, the same year as Roe v. Wade, and it's called The Institutes of Biblical Law. And it was written by R.J. Rushdoony, and is the first volume of a 3-volume work, also referred to by the same title, which is modeled after John Calvin's Institute of the Christian Religion. Together with Rushdoony's other writings, the book is the basis of Christian Reconstructionism. R.J. Rushdoony, an Armenian American Calvinist philosopher, historian, and theologian, he is credited as being the father of Christian Reconstructionism and an inspiration for the modern Christian homeschool movement. Rushdoony believed, as he wrote in the Institutes of Biblical Law, that the Old Testament law should be applied to modern society, and he advocates the reinstatement of the Mosaic law's penal sanctions, such as stoning. Under such a system, the list of civil crimes which carried a death sentence would include murder, homosexuality, adultery, incest, lying about one's virginity.
I mean, I just wanted to stop for all the non-virgins out there.
Bestiality, witchcraft, idolatry or apostasy, public blasphemy, false prophesying, kidnapping, rape, and bearing false witness in a capital case. However, Greg Bahnsen points out that such a system would only be possible if the culture at large were a Christian culture, and that the force of government could not be used to impose Christianity on a culture that didn't want it. So this was not necessarily advocating for the government to get involved and do all of this. The goal was to create a perfect Christian system with perfect Christian law, and you do so by...
Which is what? Perfect Christian law is what?
I don't think there is a perfect law. So.
Yeah.
Starting in the home,
Love your
working
neighbor.
way out,
I
and
guess.
you train children, and you get families on board with this, and then they all agree, and then
Speaking of the I love your neighbor stuff, and we were talking about Matthew 20. We've talked about Matthew 25:35 a lot. What did you think of this headline? Well, we don't want you to puke on camera here, Billy.
Sorry. 3 U.S. citizen children, one with cancer, deported to Honduras. His statement on that was family mothering 101. This guy is about as awful as it comes.
Homan.
And suddenly it spreads out, and everybody in America agrees that we should all be living like this, and then you don't even need the government to tell you to do it. That seems simple enough. R.J. Rushdoony wrote, "The heresy of democracy has, since the days of colonial New England, wreaked havoc in church and state, and Christianity and democracy are inevitably enemies." He said elsewhere that Christianity is completely and radically anti-democratic, which I agree. And he characterized democracy as the great love of the failures and cowards of life.
I would like to hear your commentary on that. Is Christianity and democracy incompatible?
No, I don't think so. Because I see Christianity as something where what Jesus was doing was trying to give voice to the voiceless. And isn't that what democracy is supposed to be? Keep in mind,
that's a big question. What is democracy supposed to be?
Yeah, well, the people of Jesus's time were expecting a military king. They were expecting this different kind of person, and instead they got a guy riding in a terrible parade on a donkey. Or if you read Matthew, on a donkey and a colt at the same time.
What? A donkey and a colt?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Or maybe I did know that and I just forgot it.
It's a weird little thing that's in there,
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that. But,
have you been to the circus where you see like the lady that is, I mean, let's be real. Jesus has already shown that he can tame water and walk on it. So, one leg on a donkey, one leg on a colt. He's got this. He's omnipotent, right?
No, he
did. Well, hold on. What? I'm sorry, I'm making a little bit of a joke, but what? Go ahead. What were you going to say?
The Bible doesn't say that Jesus is omnipotent. That's something people created later, the idea of that omnipotence, because it was one of those. I heard somebody talking about this the other day.
Do you want pushback on this?
I don't care. The thing that somebody was talking about, that concept of omnipotence, omniscience, and all that, is think about that. If there's battling dads, my dad's better at this than your dad. My dad's better than your dad at this, and my dad can beat up your dad. My dad could beat up your uncles. My dad could beat up your neighborhood. My dad could beat up the whole city. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Sure.
My dad knows who's coming. And so my dad is Santa Claus.
All right. I'm still not drawing the. So, in your view, is God omnipotent?
I don't. So, I don't want to go down the whole rabbit hole we went down last week, but
right.
But if there is a concept of free will, which I believe is biblical, then if there is a concept of free will, then the idea of something being omniscient or omnipotent implies they know what I'm doing, therefore there is no free will. So that concept doesn't make sense in a world where people have free will.
Sure.
And
okay. Well, that conversation, we don't not to go into that. So you do not believe that. Okay, so you believe there's limits. So omnipotence and omniscience, there's limits, and I would agree that you could still have a sort of omnipotent God if we were laying out the structure for this, right? That's still restricted by. Well, I have a belief that time doesn't exist, but we'll call it time. right? Restricted by time. Like, so in this case, omniscience isn't total, because if you don't have, you can make predictions probably, but you can't really accurately, because you have knowledge of every particle in the universe, as Ed would like to say. But
Yeah.
you know, because there's no real time and there's only motion, then you would, anyway, I'm kind of getting off track. What I'm trying to say is, we could still say that if we wanted to do this thing where we're apologizing, that God was the entity that lived in an existence that is not our own and started the universe, right? In some way, right? If we were to go down the Kalam ontological argument, this would be kind of what they would say, is that everything that exists has a creator, therefore the universe exists, there must be a creator, right? That's kind of like, it's very short-sighted, but so Jesus is or is not God in your view?
So the language that I've used that fits the answer to your question is fully God, fully human. I like to think about Jesus being human. I know a lot of folks.
What human can actually walk on water?
Well, some stories are helpful, aren't they?
So okay. So what human
does every story that you read in the Bible have to be a historically accurate piece of information in order for faith to exist?
In the Christian faith, does it have to be accurate for you to have faith? I think that would be largely dependent on the person. For me, the fact that this stuff is in there, and I know that it's probably not possible without some kind of like superpower force. You know, we're talking about Jesus being able to ride on a donkey and a colt at the same time, for anybody who's staying with us on this diatribe, like this whole thing that we're going on. And I said, well, he could walk on water, he can do what he wants here. And then it's gotten to, is God omnipotent and omniscient? And I think your answer here is not really. But at the same time,
I certainly would say it's not necessary for me to believe that.
You would say it's not necessary for you to believe that. Do you feel, so you don't believe that Jesus walked on water?
Think of it. Yeah, it's not. Oh, well, the walking on water. If you look at the story,
any miracle.
A lot of ways story.
Let's throw it to any miracle.
So let's look. Okay, the story that happened right before one of the walking on water stories is the feeding of the 5,000. Mm-hmm. 5 loaves, 2 fish, feeds 5,000 people. And that only counted the men. It doesn't count all the women and the children that were there. So 12,000 people. Who knows?
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
I love the idea of that story being that because a child shared what he had, mm-hmm. others realized, oh, I've got something to share. Mm-hmm. And maybe if we all shared what we had,
right,
we would be able to feed everybody here. Mm-hmm. There's going to be some that have nothing to offer, and there's going to be some that have more than they needed. And maybe if everybody only takes what they need and not more than they need, then
right. And this is you as a pastor, people. Right? You as a pastor wants to focus on you want to focus on that as opposed to the magic trick itself.
Yeah, I don't. It doesn't need to be a magic trick to me. That story doesn't need to be a magic trick.
Sure, but
if everybody shared,
yes, I understand your point on that, but you do understand that there's a lot of folks in there that need the magic tricks for it to be. Or I hate to call it magic tricks. It feels insulting. It feels insulting to call it that. The miracles.
With you, although so I have a friend that I study with every day, every week, and where he and I differ more than anything else is the need for supernatural interaction in some of those stories in particular. But also, for me, it's even more miraculous that you got 12,000 people to share their food together so that everyone was taken care of.
Right.
Which would be a greater miracle? That the people of the United States said,
right.
What we could feed and house the homeless and the hungry. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that would be a miracle.
Wouldn't that be the greatest miracle you've ever seen?
Getting that many people to agree on doing something like that, it probably. I mean, it wouldn't be like a miracle like walking on water, though.
It would be greater than that.
It would be more impactful, but it wouldn't be supernatural.
It wouldn't be more supernatural, right?
Yeah,
but it would be an amazing act of love.
So the thing is, though, when we go down this path of like the whole supernatural thing, and I've described to you what my belief on the universe is that the only eternal thing that we sort of know of in the way that we know of it, we don't know everything about it, is just energy, right?
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think a lot of people mistake God as energy, or energy for God, right? Just this force, the stuff of the universe. And I can kind of understand that. But what most people, if they want to say it the way that they say it, they want to get outside of the realm of reality. They want to move into a supernatural place in which God exists and can create something that didn't exist. So first off, you have to conceptualize nothing in the first place, which that makes my brain freeze. Like nothing.
Not enough pot in the world for that one, right?
Oh my Lord. I can't. Yeah. So
I remember being a small child, old enough to start to think about things, and you start to think about infinity.
Yeah, and then the curveball for infinity is that infinity also goes inwards, right? Like you can always divide by half, supposedly. Right. I guess until you get down to a quark, right? Which that's so impossibly small, even that's hard to conceptualize. So, anyway, so the point that I'm trying to make is that supernatural stuff that happens in the Bible, such as walking on water, such as curing a blind person, such as making water turn into wine, such as making, the fish and the loaves, it appear, right? So if we can believe in these types of miracles, and we can believe in this entity that lives supernaturally outside of existence as we know it, and thus those people are drawn to those messages.
So yes, people are drawn to that and have been for centuries. I can't argue with that. But I think there are a lot of people that that doesn't matter. What matters is, how are you treating your neighbor? Mm-hmm. How are you treating the people on the street? How are you treating your family? How are you treating, what are you doing to make the world a better place? And what motivates you to do that as a Christian would be love of God, love of neighbor, would be that, going back to that very core basic thing. So, and what I said, you said God would be more just the idea of energy, and that people interpret that as God. That I'm not saying you do. I'm saying people do interpret that as God. And sure. I can't make a good argument against that, for one thing. But the other part is that for me, the thing that is more inspirational to me is love, and how it motivates us to care for people and to make a difference in the world.
See, I can just jive with that. I don't have to. Yeah. For me, it's funny because people have been asking me like, well, so what is the deal here? Like, I think some people are thinking maybe I might turn religious again or whatever.
I think for me,
But
go ahead.
well, the fun part is that I say, listen, Billy's my pastor, right?
Right.
I don't believe in a lot of virtually all of it, but the parts that I can jive with, the parts that can mean something to me and should be able to mean, like, and this is where we've gotten into this thing where you and I have always said this isn't supposed to be a combative thing. This is supposed to be more like, how can we, come to an accord about this kind of stuff? Like, I don't have hate for the Christian. I might have a little bit of like eye rolling for the people who actually believe that a person survived in a well. I might have some eye rolls for that person that believes that literally. But like the people that take something from the message in furtherance that is more about kindness and treating people right is where I can go, right? Now, with that said, not every biblical message is something I can also jive with. Like, I can't just, interpret every Bible message this way and be like, well, I can't do that, right? So, like, yeah. Anyway, so
That was weird.
yeah, I think I got a private message that I'll look at here in a minute, but yeah. So.
Let me say this. The other thing is that when you approach me about doing this, the concept of what we're trying to do is the very fact that because we have this different worldview, maybe there's still this huge area of commonality that we have. And this concept that I've heard more recently, which is odd. I've heard this more recently that Christians believe, and this goes back to Kristi here, and this satanic panic, that Christians believe that if you are not Christian, you hate God, or you also hate Christians.
Yeah,
and that's where she's getting at, that fear is what drives these people. And if I'm driven by fear, then I can also out toward others because that's protecting me. And that's where I said to you earlier, it's a very egotistical theology.
Okay.
It's a me-centered theology.
Let's get back to Kristi and get off us for a second here. But yeah.
See how I segued?
Yeah, it's nice. Good job. We're getting better at this, maybe at least in the segue department.
His opposition to any sort of violent revolution and advocated instead the gradual reformation of society from the bottom up, beginning with the individual and family, and from there gradually reforming other spheres of authority, including church and state. So again, starts in the home, it works its way out. I actually agree that if you want to transform your society and your culture, that you do have to start small, start from the bottom up. I think the biggest problem with the left at this point, and I am on the left, but I think the biggest problem with the left is that we want to utilize the federal government, or really the government in general, to instill our own values. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
She's wrong here. I mean, she's not wrong, but I don't think this is like left. I think this is just people trying to put their values on people.
Values can be very important. We all kind of value that we don't like murder, and so pretty much all Americans agree, like, maybe we don't let people murder. That's a value we want to put on the government to use to keep us all safe, right? So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but at the same time, you can't enforce your values. You can't force other people to value what you value. And so if your goal is to change society, it is more productive, more efficient to try to work within your communities, within families, to build people up from the bottom up, because then you won't need to utilize the federal government as much to keep everybody else in line, right? That's kind of the That would be the ideal
So,
system. And so
so where
I
I disagree with
agree.
her on that, where I disagree with what she was saying about that the left is trying to use the federal government to
Impose
instill the
values.
values.
Yeah.
I think what the left is trying to do is make sure that the federal government uh, makes it uh, that allows people to have their own values. Uh, the the left tends to want more freedom for people to differ, more
Hmm.
freedom for people to, if you're gay, you can live as a gay person. If you're without the law telling you you can't, without the law telling you you're a criminal because you don't live a certain thing in the rights were you don't live a certain lifestyle. So the left isn't, I don't think, trying to use the law and use the government to instill certain morality. I think they're trying to allow different moralities to coexist without the government infringing upon that right. Whereas the right is saying, if you don't agree with us, we don't want you to. If our morals exist to uh, being gay is a terrible thing. Therefore, we don't want anybody to be allowed to be gay. We don't
Hmm.
want marriage because the old adage was if you don't like gay marriage, don't marry someone of the same sex. you know, uh,
Right.
it doesn't. No, nobody else's marriage infringes on my marriage.
Sure.
Uh, and so
I'm trying to think of any example I can think of right now in where the shoe is on the other foot and where the left would restrict a behavior. So a lot of time this is where that free speech argument comes in, right? Where people of extreme right wing positions may feel like they're censored, I guess. Maybe this is the place where
right.
this could be. But usually that's just an end around so they can put their little shitty Nazi ideas in.
Right, and that's
You know.
we'll get at some point. I'm going to get to.
But then
when
again, I
she
mean, if
talked
we're
about this.
if we're talking about ideas as a purely, I don't think that those right wing voices are really interested in free speech that use that end around, because they would also
No, if they were,
they would restrict free speech as much as they could. And
yeah, if they were so interested in free speech, then the orange one would not be out there telling the CDC that they can't talk about science, that they can't talk about
oh man,
vaccines, that they wouldn't be telling, they wouldn't be opposing DEI because they're afraid of, some devil of DEI,
are you
which is just,
frustrated? Are you frustrated with religious folks that might cite the devil when it comes to people like scientists like Anthony Fauci or whatever?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because Anthony Fauci was the most important person in America and maybe even the world for a while. And they saw him as a demon.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going.
Do have to work from the bottom up, but it almost seems as though they were being very ambitious with what they thought they could accomplish. Like they thought that they could actually get into the homes of every single American person and they could get them on board with these incredibly extremist fringe ideologies. Although it has a relatively small number of self-described adherents, Christian Reconstructionism has played a role in promoting the trend toward explicitly Christian politics in the larger American Christian right. This is the wider trend to which some critics refer generally as dominionism. Now, dominion theology, we talked a little bit about this, I think, in the last episode or maybe the first one, is also known as dominionism. It is a group of Christian political ideologies that seek to institute a nation governed by Christians and based on their understandings of biblical law. Reconstructionism is the method. It is the tool. It's what you use to get everybody on board. And then once everybody's on board, you have the end goal, which is dominionism, which is a laws and governance that is inspired by biblical law, or at least one group's interpretation of biblical law, which is really complicated. Another
Good
key
point.
figure in Christian Reconstructionism was Gary North, who married Rushdoony's daughter. Gary North was an American writer, Austrian school economic historian, and leading figure in the Christian Reconstructionist movement. North authored and co-authored over 50 books on topics including Reformed Protestant theology, economics, and history. And here's a fun fact that shouldn't surprise any of us. North converted to Christianity in high school, and after attending a rally where anti-communist activist Fred Schwartz spoke, began frequenting conservative bookstores in the Los Angeles area during his college years. And so, again, it goes right back to what we were talking about before, this fear of anti-communism, or this fear of communism that was infiltrating minds, and it was causing people to convert, to get godlier, to go to church, to do whatever they could to protect themselves, their family, their culture, and their country. So people who weren't Christian, who weren't really into this stuff, were being primed to become Christian activists by these fears of atheistic communism. In a 2011 article in the New York Times, they identified North as a central figure in Christian Reconstructionism. So this is someone who was a key player alongside R.J. Rushdoony. And so this is kind of setting the stage. These are some key players that are a little bit more underneath the surface, considered very fringe. A lot of people are not adopting the things that they're preaching or talking about, but they're still out there. They're still publishing it, and there are still evangelicals and very extremist thinkers or believers that are starting to kind of adopt these things. They're being inspired, and one of those was Francis Schaeffer. In the 1960s, Schaeffer read the works of Reconstructionist theologian R.J. Rushdoony with appreciation. And according to Professor of History Barry Hankins, it is quite likely that Schaeffer's belief that the United States was founded on a Christian base came in part from Rushdoony. Now, it does say that Schaeffer later lost his fervor because Rushdoony was a post-millennialist, holding the doctrine that the kingdom of God will be built on earth before the second coming of Jesus, and Schaeffer was a pre-millennialist, holding that the kingdom of God will only be ushered in with the second coming. This is how easy it is for
This is a
people to
wild
split.
denomination.
Regardless of if they split, if Schaeffer really disagreed with Rushdoony, obviously he was inspired. He was reading his works.
And that's just a
and he
rapture
had an
theology.
appreciation.
Yeah.
So this
Rapture
was,
theology.
The ideologies were.
Do you have any comments on rapture theology? Do you ever use much rapture stuff?
No, it's not good theology. It's actually a theology that really only exists in North America, in the United States, mostly.
Yeah.
It was invented in the 1800s, and it's wildly misusing the scripture to, one verse here and one verse there to create this thing, and then there are certainly it got infiltrated. That's the word it feels like to me. It got embedded in a lot of the study Bibles that people would get later on, and it's still very prevalent for a lot of people. Tim LaHaye, the Left Behind series of books and all that kind of stuff, and the movies, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a theology that spread the world. It's really not, and it's
well, it's crazy town.
Yeah, there's just no biblical basis for it, other than misusing.
So you don't have any problems with just dismissing Revelation as a pastor?
I don't have to dismiss Revelation. I have to understand that that's not what people put out there like that and claim that's what Revelation is about. It's just not what it's about.
Got you.
Revelation is about providing comfort to the people who were being oppressed by Nero. The 666 is actually this numerology thing that was developed later on. This is not something that was developed. This was not something that was really in use even when Jesus was. But 100 years later, they started using that kind of. It was being used with the Hebrew and the Greek.
Right. Revelation was.
666.
Am I correct?
Indicated the spelling of Nero on a coin.
Got you.
And so Revelation is about how do we overcome the oppressor king.
Got you. That's interesting. Most people take it much differently. Am I correct
Yes,
in
they
this,
do.
or am I wrong in this? Revelation was not. It's not a Dead Sea Scroll writing. It's not.
Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls are much later. The Dead Sea Scrolls are not original text. They're just the oldest we have.
But I'm just saying, like, Revelation came from a different, like, grouping, right? Of stories.
Well, it would have been. I think that, I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that they found some of it in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Oh,
But
did they? Okay.
the-
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but Revelation was written well into the 2nd century. So well after, 100 years after Jesus' death, probably. So, it was something that wasn't even considered a canon until Athanasius said, I think it belongs. And then it kind of got rolled into that. And by the time the council happened, it was there and nobody took it out.
Right. They just said, okay, it's in. They just.
Yeah.
And then later, the result of this is that American Christianity overuses it for.
Yeah, and not all of that stuff comes from Revelation, the rapture stuff. They've got a verse here, a verse there. But they often use the word, for instance, Antichrist, and it's not found in the book of Revelation.
Mm-hmm.
They refer to, there's the beast that's in the Revelation, but it's not the Antichrist. The Antichrist is the spirit of somebody who's opposed to Christ. It's really a very basic word. It's not, it's only used in the letters of John. But I know that's why you're here, is to hear that kind of stuff.
I mean,
But
listen, Revelation. I'm not going to say that we aren't going to like just go through Revelation sometime and just be, why not? I mean, as an atheist, Revelation is a book of just, oh man, if you're really going to be a literalist. And
I'm not a literalist.
Yeah, and if you're going to be one of those people that's also like, even if you go as far as to say, well, the Old Testament, the New Testament, or, well, Revelation's in the New Testament, right? And it's probably the craziest book of the Bible, in my opinion. And that,
and it is written as a dream.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the Bible is just completely misinterpreted anyway. I think most of it was supposed to be like a sort of fiction. Sort of. I don't know. It's hard to describe what even it is, but like Revelation is crazy town.
Yeah, it's a metaphorical thing.
Yeah. Crazy town if you're a literalist.
We're still getting in. He just didn't totally agree with everything that Rushdoony, had to say about certain theology. Schaeffer's son Frank wrote a book called Crazy for God, and in it he presents a portrait of his father that is far more nuanced and multidimensional than was suggested by his
I thought this was
persona.
interesting.
He states, for example, that Schaeffer's primary passions in life were not the Bible and theology, but rather art and culture. And what moved him was not theology, but beauty. And he also claimed that his father dealt with frequent bouts of depression and was verbally and physically abusive with his wife, which I hate to say, but I'm not surprised by. And so fascinating, what we're about to learn is how much he influenced this rise of the religious right, and yet he didn't really follow it in private himself. Now, here's where we connect the dots. Because many evangelical Christians of all types have embraced Christian Reconstructionism in part or in whole. Evangelical leaders who endorsed it explicitly or implicitly include Jerry Falwell Sr., Bill Gothard, Jay Grimstead, D. James Kennedy, Tim LaHaye, who wrote the Left Behind series. We'll get into that in another episode. Doug Phillips, Howard Phillips, Pat Robertson, Francis Schaeffer, and all endorsing Christian Reconstructionism. And these were the key figures in the moral majority, the rise of the religious right. And these figures in the religious right were influenced by Rushdoony and helped bridge the gap between intellectual Reconstructionism and the practical activism of leaders like Jerry Falwell. So now we're kind of bridging the gap, we're connecting the dots. We're seeing how these really quiet fringe ideologies were kind of seeping up into the culture. And then they were being grabbed by these evangelical leaders that were very loud and charismatic and had a lot of trust behind them, had a good reputation, and a lot of people were listening to them. In 1978, Schaeffer formed a church guild called the Society of Reformed Philosophical Thinkers. That's a mouthful. This was merged in 1988 with Into Thy Word Ministries, which was then transformed into the Francis A. Schaeffer Institute of Church Leadership Development. Oh. And the purpose is to strategize how to reach and train pastors and church leaders to focus on Christ-centered principles. Its aim is to point the church back to the truth and true spirituality. Francis Schaeffer is credited with helping spark a return to political activism among Protestant evangelicals and fundamentalists in the late 1970s and early 1980s, especially in relation to the issue of abortion. In his memoir, Crazy for God, Schaeffer's son Frank takes credit for pressing his father to take on the abortion issue, which Schaeffer initially considered too political. Which I think that's exactly what Jerry Falwell was thinking in the beginning too. They're like, I'm not too concerned with abortion. That's politics. We're focused on religion here.
Right. So they didn't even know that this was their meal ticket yet.
Yeah, that's interesting. And because of their hatred of Catholics, they didn't know that they also.
Yeah.
Interesting that Schaeffer and Falwell and other leaders didn't see the abortion issue as a religious issue, even though today the pro-life crowd is mostly religious. Not saying all, but mostly religious. And they utilize their religion to take...
What's that?
All.
All? You think it's all?
If it's not, it's more than mostly.
It's to the point where it's like you might as well just... would you even say that maybe most of these folks, even if they say that they aren't religious, are still like maybe indoctrinated into some of these beliefs from maybe like some kind of, they don't go to a specific church, but this is the way society is, so this is the way I believe, you know, one nation under God.
Let me just say, it feels that way to me.
Yeah.
This position, but yet back just decades ago, the main Christian leaders and the most extreme, the most fringe, they weren't concerned with abortion. They just didn't think it was a problem. Schaeffer's views were expressed in two works: his book entitled A Christian Manifesto, as well as the book and film series Whatever Happened to the Human Race. And A Christian Manifesto was a response to the Communist Manifesto. So
that's right. It needed a response after 150 years.
Schaeffer's How Should We Then Live in 1976 and Whatever Happened to the Human Race in 1979, co-produced with C. Everett Koop, galvanized evangelicals to view issues like abortion and secularism as existential threats. These works heavily influenced Falwell and others in the evangelical movement, providing intellectual and theological justification for their political engagement. Schaeffer was one of the first evangelical leaders to emphasize abortion as a moral crisis. His efforts helped shift evangelical focus on the issue, which became central to the Moral Majority's platform under Falwell.
This is Schaeffer that she just said really wasn't all that interested, but found the meal ticket. And I think possibly I was just fidgeting with my rings. That might have been the kicking. I'll quit doing that. Sorry, Jessica.
Whatever Happened to the Human Race was produced in 1979. And I'm pretty sure 1979 was the first year that Jerry Falwell started preaching against abortion. So this is a direct inspiration. And remember, Roe v. Wade was in 1973. So we've got a long gap, a nice few years before anybody's talking about it. Now, I say that, but then I know there's going to be people that are like, no, there were Christians that were against it. And yes, there were. I shouldn't have spoken in such an extreme, but most Americans didn't. 70%.
What's that?
Shafley and Anita Bryant were early on adopters of that as an agenda.
Right. Anita Bryant, yes.
You know, the lady sold oranges
Yes, right.
80% didn't have a problem with it. So there were only a few. It wasn't a big conversation, even in Christian circles. In whatever happened to the human race, they examined how the rejection of the doctrine of man made in God's image resulted in devaluing human life.
Based on biblical teachings, people used to view human life as unique, something to be protected and loved because it was made in the image of God.
We are godless, everything's going bad, and maybe it's because we don't respect human life. Maybe because women are getting abortions and they just don't even care about human life. Like, that just shows that we're in moral decline. There was that connection being made there.
But capital
And this is when
punishment's
they were
okay.
Right. So the contradictions are not being weighed yet. And I don't think they are still being weighed when you approach the abortion argument, right?
I agree.
Because, as an atheist, I have I'm not as enclosed by, verses like, when you were in the womb, I knew you, and therefore I might have a religious feeling about it, right? But even then, even then, there is a certain point when I'm going to have, like, personally, an ick feeling if I were to know a healthy fetus was aborted willy-nilly. The problem is that that's just not what's happening, right? It's
Right.
Late-term abortions are usually horrific.
They're very rare, and they happen in horrific scenarios.
Yeah, horrific scenarios for families, where you're talking about, like, life and death of the mother or the child. Maybe the child is, tragically deformed in a way that
They won't survive for more than a minute.
or even then, I would more than a minute, I would think would be. So, I've known ladies that maybe took advice from a doctor that a fetus should be aborted and went on through with it. And then maybe it's a complicated decision, maybe didn't regret the decision, but only that child only knew pain.
Right.
The one I'm thinking of in particular. And I don't know. Like, I guess to get to my point is that it's not my business. So it's a woman and a doctor, and the stuff that they talk about, the horrors that could be associated even with just simple childbirth, which seems like such a natural thing, but right. It's childbirth kills women historically.
That's right. Yeah, and biblically speaking, I know one of the folks here would say, well, there's some recipe for abortion. That's not really what that is. It's if you do this, then that'll and the baby is okay. Yeah. Then this is good thing. But that's not really a recipe for abortion.
I don't think I've looked over the recipe for abortion stuff several times. I don't think
that's not what that is.
Well, okay, that's not the point, right? The point is that it's not a recipe for abortion, even though you could, in loose terms, say, hey, well, if this lady drank, if these things were true, right?
Right, that's right. But the other thing is, there is a law. There was a law that's in the Old Testament. The only one that actually addresses a fetus. Well, and that is the idea that if a man is in a fight with another man and he gets thrown into a woman who's pregnant, and the baby dies, then he has to pay the father of the baby a small fine.
A small
If the
fine.
woman dies, if the woman dies, it's a much bigger fine.
Yeah. Nonetheless,
and keep in mind, women weren't valued that much either. They were property of the husband.
Nonetheless, the point is when people say that the only mention of abortion is that the T or whatever that will make the baby abort, and therefore it was proven that the woman was an adulterer or whatever. It's not so much that this is like how to make an abortion T. It's about like the fact that this is being done, by the priesthood, I guess, right? Is that God doesn't really care about the fetus, right? And if we're looking at the Old Testament, God don't really care about babies in general.
Yeah. I saw Dan McClellan doing a thing where this guy's trying to make an argument that, and he misuses a phrase, the slaughter of the innocent. Actually, usually slaughtering babies up to 2 years old, in the Gospel of Matthew in the Christmas story.
Mm-hmm.
The Magi were on their way, and Herod had ruled that. But this other guy was trying to use that phrase to talk about. There's a lot of times where there's basically genocide perpetrated by God to give the Israelites their freedom, or to give the Israelites land, or that kind of stuff. And there's no excuse. There's no way. There's no place where you can argue that the slaughtering of babies is a good thing. And this guy was trying to say, well, I have good news for you. The good news is that no innocents were killed. The bad news is nobody was innocent.
That's right. Those demon babies, man.
And he said, the only person in the Bible that is innocent is Jesus, and he was killed by man, and note the word man. And he said, so that was not God killing the innocents. That was man killing the innocent, man killing God. And I was like, this is the most absurd argument I've ever heard of in my life to defend the killing of innocent people. That's some theological gymnastics again that just is absurd. And I appreciate Dan McClellan's response to that. His final statement to them was, if you think this is a good thing, then you need to not only one part, but the second part was just, you need to grow up.
You need to grow up.
Because that's just childish and terrible theology.
Yeah, I think Ed mentioned there the Amalekites. Is that what we're talking about there? Right? Anyway.
Yeah, but that whole thing, that's not really a potion for abortion. It was really it's really a way to prove whether or not she was faithful or not. Right.
Again, the point is that if the T were to work as the priest would have said under, God's whatever, like maybe there's some kind of magic trick here, right? That the priest is also performing. Right. If this were to be true, it's commentary on the validity of the fetus. I think that's the point.
Which I think goes to the other one too. They're both kind of saying that
like if this were
less value.
Right. If this were to work, right, this would be a holy endorsed, Holy, right, endorsed abortion. Right.
Jesus didn't say anything about it, and Paul didn't either. So.
Yeah, but there are some folks that will say, like, the Jesus part of the Bible and the Old Testament are almost like two different stories, and I don't necessarily disagree with that up to the point where Jesus does say, like, I came here to fulfill, right? So there's some questions here, is what I'm saying. It's not clear.
Fulfill doesn't mean to enact what was there. It means to complete. So it means that there is a better way, and also that
I think that's an interpretation. a little
Sure
bit.
it is.
Yeah.
So
For
is
sure.
to fulfill in the way that other people say it.
That's what I'm saying. Like some people will say, "Hey, you know, no, Jesus was a Jew. Like he did not believe the
Right.
Jewish stuff."
Yeah, and then there's the guy that I told you about the other day he was screaming at the CNN reporter that was doing a documentary, and he said, "I'm coming for you, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's in Leviticus. If you're a Christian,
yeah.
you believe this." I'm like, well, if you're a Christian, you've heard about Jesus, and you heard that he said the opposite. So,
Well, and Leviticus says a lot of things.
amen, brother.
Yeah.
To get more involved in politics. We need to fight this. We need to fight over this decline in our morality. I found an interview on PBS with Frank Schaeffer's son. In it, he says, when Roe v. Wade came along and the issue of abortion came up, my father took a pro-life position, an anti-abortion position, which then put him in bed with people like Jerry Falwell. Metaphorically speaking, Pat Robertson, James Dobson, and others, all of whom were very influenced by him. So ironically, by the time he died in 1984, he was principally remembered as the intellectual architect and the father of the religious right. Not because he was particularly to the right politically, but because of the fact that he was very much involved with this one issue, the pro-life issue, which defined the right for a whole generation of people. And all of this has inspired and led to the 7 Mountain Mandate, which is
Do you know
very
about
relevant.
this, the 7 Mountain Mandate?
Never seen that before.
Yeah, I never saw this either.
To what we're experiencing in our culture and our politics today. And so I want to kind of briefly go over that because it's going to lead us into our next episode. 7 Mountain Mandate, also known as 7M or 7MM or 7 Mountains Dominionism, I guess they can't decide on a name, is a dominionist conservative Christian movement within Pentecostal and evangelical Christianity, and particularly independent charismatic groups. It holds that there are 7 aspects of societies that believers seek to influence or dominate: family, religion, education, media, arts and entertainment, business, and government. In 1975, along with fellow evangelist Bill Bright, who was the founder of Campus Crusade for Christ, and Lauren Cunningham, founder of Youth with a Mission, Schaeffer was one of the founders of what would be later termed the 7 Mountain Mandate. The idea would later go on to be popularized by Bethel Church pastor Bill Johnson and Lance Wallnau.
Do you know these
I don't know if
people?
I've ever actually heard his name. I've just read it.
Bill Bright. I do.
And we're going to talk about him. The movement is believed by its
Campus
followers to begin in
Crusade.
1975 with a purported message from God delivered to evangelicals Lauren Cunningham, Bill Bright, and Francis Schaeffer, ordering them, so they heard the voice of God, ordering them to invade the 7 spheres of society identified as family, religion, education, blah, 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 blah. As we've talked about, there's a very common theme in Christian nationalism, and that theme is fear. Be afraid of everything. Fear communism, fear atheism, fear godlessness, fear civil rights, fear government overreach, fear queer people, fear feminists, fear unions, fear everyone that doesn't look like us and isn't like us and standing for the exact same things we're standing for. And so this was the perfect environment for the rise of the Satanic Panic. And the Satanic Panic kind of happened in the 80s and the 90s. And I think a lot of people think it was like a short-lived thing, but the Satanic Panic never really died out. It just changed shape. And it persisted even into the 2000s when I was growing up in the church as a teenager. I was being fed the Satanic Panic. I remember going through a multi-week course in my youth group that was like a video series designed to make us afraid of satanic things, of rock music and games and all kinds of things that could introduce Satan into our lives. And we were...
See, this is what we're talking about, the Satanic Panic. And it's really just an attack on secular culture.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the stuff that she's talking about, and something I read, when I Googled it a minute ago earlier when we were talking about it, was it was going on before the 80s.
Well, yeah.
With rock and roll music in particular, there was this belief that Elvis Presley was going to, ruin, going back, that far. But I remember I was in school high school and college all the way through the 80s. And I remember in high school, and I'm not sure which song it was. I want to say it was Revolution. That if you, the theory was if you played it backwards, and we could do that with the records back then, the vinyl, you could turn it around. And you could hear, you
the Paul is dead
gibberish
stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And that was then carried on in other ways. Oh, if you play this music backwards, then it's satanic. And she's talking about games, obviously, and you and I both know that she's talking about Dungeons and Dragons. And I played Dungeons and Dragons.
I love to roll up a character.
I have I can't tell you how many colleagues that I know played Dungeons and Dragons in high school. Certainly, it never was. I mean, it was fun and I enjoyed it. I have a friend that very much got involved in it, and he was pretty darn good at it.
Right. Do you think that Dungeons and Dragons was only a threat because it was like maybe imagery and a world where there's many gods and many different kinds of races and fantasy racism is a thing.
Yeah. Did someone put that in the chat there?
What's that?
That sounded like you were responding to something there.
No. I just have I've played enough Dungeons and Dragons to know that fantasy racism is a thing.
Oh, interesting.
Well, I mean, you've seen Lord of the Rings, right?
Yes, most of it.
So you know that the dwarves and the elves kind of have a little beef.
Oh, sure, yeah, and
that's racism.
Dungeons and Dragons is all about trying to, accomplish the mission, whatever the mission is.
Sure.
And yes, you're killing things, and
it's imagination play,
Yeah, but so I had this. My mother had this friend who was fundamentalist. She clearly lived in the world of satanic panic, and I used to have an 8-track. I had an 8-track player in my car for a number of years when I was in last part of high school and into college for a number of years. And yes, this is in the 80s when 8-tracks were out of style, but I had
you're just holding on,
Alan
man.
Parsons. I would say, it's quality skill, quality stuff, better quality than the cassettes were. But I had true?
8-tracks had better quality than.
I think they had. I think they did. I think that's true.
They
just weren't as easy to. They weren't as easy to, recreate. You could.
Sure.
It was easier to get a cassette and cheaper to buy a cassette, and it was easier to mass produce.
Hold more songs on it.
You could fast forward and all that stuff. Yeah.
Right.
So, but with the 8-track that I had, 8-track is really beside the point here. I had Alan Parsons' project, Eye in the Sky. And I was at home, and that 8-track was sitting on my mother's dining room table, and her friend was there, and she walked by it and she picked it up, and she's looking at that blue picture on the front cover of the 8-track, and she turns it over and she's looking, and she sees the word psychobabble, the songs, and she says, "Is this satanic?" I'm like, why would you think that? And it goes back to Dungeons and Dragons and all of that. She thinks that because she doesn't understand.
You got me wanting to look up the Eye in the Sky cover art. So this is what she maybe thought was. Let's see if I can.
The song "Psychobabble" was what she thought was satanic. But I'm wondering if the picture had anything to do with it.
Well, the picture that I'm looking at, the Alan Parsons project, has like an eye.
Yeah, Eye in the Sky.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's. It looks like hieroglyphics almost.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that's right. So, it also looks like the all-seeing eye of the Masonics a little bit.
Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can just pull it up here so everybody can see it.
The fact that because she didn't understand the word psychobabble, the first thought in her head was, "Is this satanic?" goes to the mindset of somebody who is in this. What and like I said, I never heard the word satanic panic, but I certainly understand it as a concept. That goes to the mindset of where she was.
Right. Let's see if I got this right. View picture.
And by the way, it's a very good album.
You know what?
And
we'll just do this.
The intro to that album was one of the most used intros for decades in commercials and at stadiums and all kinds of places to build, to kind of build tension, suspense.
I don't know. You probably can't see that. You'd probably have to look at the. Oh well. You know what?
Yeah, it's not.
I'm done with this. Sorry, guys. For the people who are watching, you might be able to see what we're talking about, but it's probably just not even worth it. So we're just going to remove this.
Yeah, but you were asking about Dungeons and Dragons, and was it? I do think that there's a part of the imagery of Dungeons might have been because of people's
satanic or whatever
preconceived vision of Dante's Satan or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, there's not a picture in the Bible that says here's what Satan looks like. And people refer to Satan when they mean Lucifer, and they refer to Satan as the same person, and they're not. And there's all that kind of stuff is going to. There's not a kind of.
I think. Can I just say that I feel like the demons in the Bible are super fun to think about if you're a Dungeons and Dragons fan.
Legion.
Well, the Diablo
they killed a lot of pigs.
The Diablo that came out recently, Diablo 4, the main villain is Lilith. So that's kind of fun. Anyway, let's finish Kristi Burke here.
We were encouraged. There's a little fun side story here. We were encouraged to invite our friends to come to these things, especially our ungodly
Talking
friends.
about our youth group.
And so me being the good Christian girl that I was, I said, okay, well, I'll invite my friends that aren't believers. And so I did. I invited my friends that listened to Marilyn Manson and, weren't necessarily involved in any kind of church life at all, and they came. Looking back on it, I'm like, they had every reason to make fun of me. Okay, they had every reason to be like, I am never hanging out with you again, you're a weirdo. This was strange and bizarre. Because after the youth group concluded, we were outside and I was hanging out with my friends, and I was like, what did you think? And they were so nice. They were like, Kristi, we respect you, we love you, but this is just not for us. We just don't agree with it. And it's so funny to look back on that now, because I was taught that as a Christian, I would be so persecuted by the world. I would be so persecuted by anybody who wasn't a Christian and made fun of, and they would be mean to me. And really, I was the one kind of persecuting. I was the one inviting people to have some pastor or youth group leader or video tell them that they were bad and what they were doing was sinful and they were being led by Satan. And they were just like, I'm just not really a big fan of this, but you do you. So it's so funny how you're fed these things in church and you believe them. I still believed I was a persecuted Christian even when my friends were not persecuting me for being a Christian. It's really important to remember how these ideologies and beliefs get put into the brain, especially in the minds of young people. And even when they're faced with information that shows them that what they've been taught isn't true, they still believe it because it's been indoctrinated. And indoctrinated beliefs are very difficult to step outside of, and people will exist within their cognitive dissonance before they actually change their mind or shift their perspective, especially if they're a kid and they believe it's what they're supposed to do. What kind of fed the satanic panic alongside these fears of atheistic communism were like counterculture backlash in the 1970s. You had in the 60s and the 70s occult movies like Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, the rise of interest in occult practices. I'm sure it added to the panic and the fear of this
red rum.
External force.
What's your favorite horror movie?
I hate horror movies.
Me too. I'm not.
I just hate them. I think they're boring and
The Shining is kind of cool though.
Yeah, that's been a long time since I saw that. Poltergeist made me laugh.
Poltergeist made you laugh. The whole TV thing is just silly.
Yeah.
That like the Poltergeist would have to like get HDMI now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I just never. I'm curious if you like Marilyn Manson.
Me?
Yeah, as a musician.
Like as a okay, again, this is we talked about this before. As a musician, do I think that Marilyn Manson hits his target? I would.
No.
I would say generally
Do you
Marilyn
like-
Manson. Do I like Marilyn Manson's music? No, I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm also not a huge fan of Marilyn Manson the person. So
There's a lot of reasons for that. I never got them. I mean, I don't care what he looks like. I mean, we had Boy.
yeah, I mean, there's
Boy George was sweet, but
well, but I
I
mean,
never
even
liked
before
him.
that, you had Kiss, you've had Gwar.
oh yeah,
I mean, Gwar. Yeah, that is the most '80s thing ever. Gwar, right?
yeah. I'm not familiar with them.
You're not familiar with Gwar. Well,
I wasn't into alternative music in those days. I liked Air Supply, for God's sake.
So I
Barry
mean,
Manilow.
a lot of the thing is, a lot of this stuff, you know, Ozzy Osbourne,
Yeah.
you know, Alice Cooper, you had a lot of performance art type stuff. Marilyn Manson just lives in that same vein in terms of his
I agree.
performance art. But from what I understand about him, he's kind of an abusive dick, and
Yeah, it sounds like it.
and you know,
And I
I'm
think
not
of
gonna-
the ones you mentioned.
the songs that I think of about Marilyn Manson, like the Dope Show, and that remake of what was the remake he did? That was like
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't I didn't keep attention to his stuff because I didn't really like the style.
I thought the Dope Show was a cool song back on when that came out, but it was also very just different, and so I like that, but I don't know, man.
Of all those musicians you named, the one that probably had the most talent was Alice Cooper.
Ooh, do I agree with that? I'll have to think about that harder. I mean, I just named some superstars. Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah, Kiss wasn't necessarily the most talented.
No, Kiss is not like, you know, they're. I don't know. I don't want to speak to their level of musicianship, but they definitely knew how to make a simple rock and roll song. Sweet Dreams.
As my choir director
Sweet
said
Dreams
about
are,
Elvis Presley.
Sweet Dreams are made of
he
these.
said-
Yes, that's what it is.
Yeah. Oh, is that Marilyn Manson made that one? Yeah. One day we'll talk about the worst. What's the worst remake? But
The worst remake, boy.
not for today. You gotta go on.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's not our thing, but I tell you what, we could do sometime is we could look up. There's a guy named Pat Finnerty who reviews the worst of the worst covers or remakes of songs. So, you know,
Well, there's some great musicians who did terrible remakes.
Yeah, and some songs are just not meant to be remade.
Yeah.
You know, you can cover them if you're a bar musician, but you can't remake them.
That's taking
Yes.
over, especially when you see your fellow Americans getting interested in such dark, scary things. You have the publication of Michelle Remembers in 1980, and this was a book by psychiatrist Lawrence Pazder, and Michelle Smith claimed to document satanic ritual abuse. It was later discredited, but it served as a catalyst to the satanic panic. Around this time, a few years later, you had the McMartin preschool trial, which was one of the most high-profile cases of alleged satanic ritual abuse. There were claims of underground tunnels, human sacrifice, and sexual abuse at a California daycare, and this sparked nationwide hysteria. I think this case went on for like 6 years before they realized that the claims were being made by someone who was very mentally unwell and that they were not true. So there was a lot of panic about these like satanic rituals that were happening. And then you had reporters going into these underground satanic cults and making documentaries on them and really kind of sparking fear.
You have to give a blood sacrifice.
Sally Jesse Raphael.
It's supposed to keep you protected. It's supposed to keep you pure.
And think about how media works. If a lot of people are watching, especially if people are afraid, they're watching, you're getting more views, you're making more money. And so other reporters started kind of latching on and doing stories about Satanism and really sparking this fear of the satanic panic. And it's crazy because it literally stemmed from like, you know, some hippies in the 60s and 70s, and the fact that they were just a little counterculture, the fact that people were getting into scary movies, and then you have these made-up stories about satanic abuse, about these preschools that are experiencing satanic abuse. Most of these stories did turn out to be fake. They were just false, and some of these trials went on for years before people found out that these were fake stories. So you have to think in that time frame, there's a lot of fear being that is kind of festering and growing within families and cultures and churches about Satanism. And so there's always going to be a response to that. You have the rise of evangelical and political fears and Christian leaders like Jerry Falwell and organizations like Focus on the Family, which were amplifying concerns about occult influences in media, music, and culture. Heavy metal and role-playing games, bands like Black Sabbath, and games like Dungeons and
Black
Dragons
Sabbath
were targeted as tools of satanic
Judas
indoctrination. You had the growing secularization of America, the rise of feminism, LGBTQ rights, other social changes that were viewed as threats by traditional groups. If you're in a traditional American, you see feminists and gay people and all these people that people in the civil rights movements that were fighting against the government and causing chaos or wreaking havoc. That is adding to the fear. So we just kind of have the fear piled on, and then the groups that benefit from this fear that are just perpetuating the problem and making it worse. There was much incentive for reporters, evangelical leaders, political conservatives to create the fear, to keep it going, and to make sure that the American people stayed afraid and fighting with one another. So then they'd vote however they were manipulated to vote. It's a very smart tactic, and it works, and it still works today. We are still experiencing the culture wars and the moral panic. And what's really crazy about that is, for the last several decades, crime in the United States has been on a decline. Right. We are not seeing more crime. We might be seeing reports of more crime now that we have 24/7 news cycles going all of the time, because they make a lot of money when they're always giving you news. But
it leads.
Reports of it.
That's right. And, since there's more reports, even though there's not more crime, we have to blame somebody. And, right now, we're blaming immigrants. It's awesome.
Then we're also going to militarize militarize police forces.
Oh, we've already done that.
Doesn't mean we have more.
Well, yes, we have, but
And
now he's
so
talking about actually bringing the military in to replace the support.
Yeah. There's
that's martial law.
I don't know what.
It's not constitutional.
There's a lot that's constitutionally dubious that's going on right now.
There is,
but
and it goes back to this whole thing.
The thing is, and I don't want to be, I've been tooting this horn for a long time, so I'll leave it at that.
Me too.
People are under the impression that America as a country is in moral decline. And that is why we are experiencing the culture wars that we're experiencing right now in our politics. But in reality, overall crime, violent crime is gone down drastically. I think it did spike a little bit a few years back, and then it went back down. But overall, we see a decline, not an increase in crime. And so their entire movement, campaign, the culture wars, everything is born of a lie that we are in moral decline and we're all falling and failing as a society, when really we're doing pretty good. There's a lot of problems, we got a lot to fix, but overall we've been doing okay. And these people that don't belong to traditional white Christian groups, they are still being targeted as part of the problem. The reason that our society is in decline. The
Those-
reason that
those
our
4-year-olds with
morality as a
cancer,
society is in decline.
they're gonna get
and
you.
That's just not the truth. It's just not the truth. People being gay, people being feminists, women getting abortions are not creating the very real problems that Americans face every single day, which is not being able to afford housing, not being able to afford food. The problems that we face as a country are not coming from the internal enemies that political and religious leaders want us to turn our sights on. It's always been about fear, making you afraid of something that isn't the problem, so you don't actually concern yourself with what is the problem. And then a lot of very powerful people, a lot of wealthy people get to do what they want, continue oppressing you as an American, making their money, getting their way.
She's getting a little ranty here, I
And
believe.
they never have to worry
I
about
agree
you
with her
coming after them
sentiment.
because you're too focused on the culture war that
Yeah.
they've wrapped you up in. So every single time this happens, we have a big culture war, and then at the end of it, we all realize, oh, that was kind of pointless. That was silly. The people we waged the war on weren't the problem. And then we do it again, and then we do it again, and we keep doing it. So we got to find a better way. And we have to start realizing it and recognizing when there are people in power that have their own incentives, their own reasons for doing these things, that are feeding you information, that are feeding you fear, and feeding you solutions to that fear that probably aren't very good solutions in the first place, but it's the only thing you're being given. So it works.
And I would
So I
argue
think
that
we
it's
need to
not
keep that
just
in
the
our
people
mind as we move
in power,
forward.
that it's the people who are powerless in some way that perpetuate the fear, because it's better to blame somebody else for your struggles than it is to say, you know what, this is the world we
Better
live
or
in.
easier?
Absolutely easier. Yeah.
Right.
It makes me feel better if it's not my fault
Right.
that I failed at something. It makes me feel better if, so it's again, it's protectionism.
It's a cope.
And if the first off, it's easy to talk about the Pat Robertsons and the Jerry Falwells and the big evangelists that are out there, that or have been out there and are still out there promoting all of this stuff. But it's also being done in the small little church with some uneducated pastor who's never.
I would
did a
say
wedding
that's.
with a pastor who couldn't read.
I would say that's the majority of it.
Yeah, and it goes back to what she started with, which is she didn't use the word grassroots, but that's what they were saying. You got to start in the home. You got to start in the community. You build from there. The Republican Party has done an excellent job of convincing people that, if you're going to get somewhere, you got to get in the school boards. You got to get in the city councils, and you got to get in those things. And of course, they're talking to folks in small communities.
Right.
And it's worked.
I thought they were also. I thought the Republican Party and conservative thought proliferators, I guess, were very smart to build an AM radio network.
Oh yeah.
Built around maybe the Rush Limbaugh show and the personalities that would surround him.
Yeah, the rise of Rush Limbaugh was fearful.
When I say good job, I don't mean beneficial. I just
effective.
mean effective. Like they were very effective in developing a system that even I would say that you and I now we're experiencing and are participating in the new frontier of independent media and thought. But I would say that the right wing did a better job of infiltrating online spaces, and then
even Google searches.
Right. Well, yeah, and then doing a good job at creating confusion and maybe capitalizing on the human condition, right? It's fun that Ed's still with us, but we've been talking. He sent me an interesting video on AI's ability to convince a human of something, right? It's a longer conversation. But one thing that I said back to him was, well, this is still based off the fact that humans can change their mind, and yes, this is manipulation. And of course, me and him have been talking about free will for a long time. And it's like, okay, well, do you have free will if you can be manipulated? And I'd make the argument that if you can change your mind at all, that is a free will. It doesn't mean that you're good at deciding why you've changed your mind. Like
Right, that's right.
You can have some bad info, and listen, I think it's true that you can be jacked up and influenced, and I think there is ways to hijack a human's condition to kind of make them change their mind. And the thing that we've discovered with AI is that they're really, really good at it. They've discovered the best, most possible, like the best route so far. And this is a sort of, I don't know. I think the term that was used was super manipulation or super convincing or something like that.
But the thing about AI is it doesn't know anything. It doesn't understand anything.
Yeah,
it simply
I'll
gathers
have
data and compiles it.
maybe I'll send you the video and you'll.
I wanted to talk about something I talked to somebody about just yesterday or today.
Sure.
I'm not sure
Yeah.
when I talked to her. In talking about Christian nationalism, you and I are white guys.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start there. And we're opposed to Christian nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
So
They're super persuasive.
I have there's a colleague in my community who is the cousin of a great Steeler who an AME Zion Church, which is
hold on.
Methodist.
We had a little internet thing there.
Okay. So she is the pastor of an AME Zion, which is African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church.
Okay.
The AME and the AME Zion churches were created right after the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And their target was to go out to the communities where Black people were living now that they weren't enslaved. So it's a predominantly Black denomination.
Yeah.
And she was asking me about somebody else, another pastor who, and I said, well, most of the folks in the church that he would have started or did start would be folks that are very in touch with Christian nationalism. And boy, did that set off for her a huge red flag, because for her, and let me say, I think she theologically is probably pretty conservative. But when it comes to Christian nationalism, there is not much difference for her than white nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that,
my standpoint on that is, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, you and I can sit back and say, yeah, objectively, that makes sense. And it's not like this is a revelation to either one of us. But it certainly is a revelation to some of the folks that agree with Christian nationalism and don't realize how racist.
Or were indoctrinated into a system where they didn't question a lot.
Yes, I would agree with that too. I take the flags out of the sanctuary during the high holy days. That's my compromise. They don't belong in the sanctuary in the first place.
Right.
The Christian flag, so-called Christian flag, was invented so that, and it looks like it's designed in the model of the United.
Right.
It doesn't have stripes.
It's the white flag with the it's the flag with the white. It's like a white flag with a cross in
red cross on a blue field.
On a blue field where the stars would be on the American flag. Yeah,
exactly. And that flag was designed so that they could bring the American flag into the sanctuaries. That's the whole purpose.
They wanted to have some flags, Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
They wanted to, and this was after World War II. So they brought that in. That's where that whole concept comes.
Well, this was like the Reconstruction thing anyway. This is probably a part of that.
I'm sure it absolutely is. And,
to bring a level of patriotism with it.
So many of my churches will have flags in them. And if you try to take them out, you might as well just take Christian off of the church, take the cross out, take, anything that is symbolic of Christianity out. To them, it's the same thing. There's this equation of being an American. And the argument is, well, we wouldn't have, I had one lady that said, we wouldn't have Christianity if we didn't have soldiers. And I'm like, well, there are people that don't have the freedom of religion around the world that are still Christian, that are still practicing their faith in all kinds of places. There were Russians in the USSR. There were folks that were worshiping underground.
Can I just say, I don't think we wouldn't have X religion if we didn't have soldiers is a good endorsement of your religion.
How do you mean that? You're saying that's not a good endorsement. You're being sarcastic, right?
Because I'm saying that's not a good endorsement. Like the reason why we have a X religion is because we have soldiers. Well, because religion a lot of times was in fact forced. You're right.
And her argument is we wouldn't have. I mean, to claim that we wouldn't have the Bible if we didn't have the U.S. Constitution. I'm like, what about those 1,800 years, 1,700 years since Jesus died? That there was no American Constitution.
Sure.
The Christian church is not dependent on being a part of a particular nation, but that's not what these folks believe. These folks believe that America is a Christian. And so for my African American pastor who's just starting out in her pastoral career, though she is older than I, she just was, I don't need to be with those people because they hate me.
Right.
And the pastor was reaching out to her because he was trying to collaborate with her. And I said, just be aware of who you're walking into with if you do collaborate. But it's just it just kind of brought to me, as a white man, I don't experience how other folks, especially other Christians in other denominations, how they experience it negatively as well.
Right.
Christian nationalism is neither good for Christian.
It's not, you broke up there a little bit, but yeah, it's Christian nationalism is not good for the nation or Christianity, is what I think you said.
That is what I said. Yes, I'll stop moving my mic.
I don't know if that's what's happening or if it's just Discord. It happens with the other. It happens with the other headset too.
It happened when I moved my mic too. So.
I think basically we're done with her video. I don't think we need to hear any more from Kristi. We thank Kristi Burke. We might come back to one of her videos later. I have other atheists that have deconstructed that we'll talk about later. I don't want to only do deconstructed atheists, and what their positions are. But we did talk a little bit about the Satanic Panic, and I think before we have talked about the Church of Satan now, or whatever. It's like it's a group of atheists. It's silly, but they sort of have a commandments list. Would you like to see them? Have we talked about this?
It's been a while since I have seen it, so I couldn't quote anything on it.
The Satanic Commandments are pretty crazy.
Notice the 7 tenets.
Yeah, the 7 fundamental tenets, and then you got this this imagery right here, because this is designed to mess with Christians, right, when they get here.
Yeah.
Because this is what they say. This is the Dungeons and Dragons they see. This is the villains.
That's right.
Right. But then you go down, right? And here are the 7 fundamental tenets. 1 should strive to act with compassion and empathy towards all creatures in accordance with reason. Right? The struggle for justice is an ongoing necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. One's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone. The freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. To willfully and unjustly encroach upon freedoms of another is to forego one's own. Beliefs should conform to one's best scientific understanding of the world. One should take care never to distort scientific facts to fit one's beliefs. People are fallible. If one makes a mistake, one should do one's best to rectify it and resolve any harm that might have been caused. And then 7, every tenet is a guiding principle designed to inspire nobility in action and thought. The spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word. And, you know, it's just, it's funny to think about the satanic the panic. But if you were to pull this out and be like, what do you think of these 7 tenets? And you didn't tell them it was satanic.
That's right.
What would they say about it?
Yeah, I think that's while I don't disagree with these things. I could see some folks having issue with some of them, but they're just jerks, you know, thinking, you know, we talked about this a long time ago, the your body, my choice.
Oh, those
movement that started, you know, they would look at number 3 and say, no.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a movement, but it was a saying that some right-wing jerk-offs definitely were.
It had movement, is what I should have said.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in some way it is a movement because we have now many restrictions on abortion in many states. And you know, the men
and don't forget they're trying to take away
empowered.
They're trying to take away no-fault divorce so that a woman really has more difficulty getting a divorce because you know, her husband has the right to use her. However, yeah,
it's some bad shit going on right now, but we're here. We're talking about it, and I think with us reading the 7 tenets of the Satanic Temple, we're going to end this Pastor and Atheist show. Thanks for all y'all who continue to watch throughout the couple of hours. And next week, we're going to get off this. I have some fun stuff for us to watch. I've been kind of collecting, but I wanted to make sure that we I know for you, Christian nationalism is something that you rail against, and I also rail against, and I wanted to make sure that we did. Properly.
I have railed against it without the words since I have known you.
I mean, let me join you in your fight, Billy. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, guys, again, thank you. And I'm going to end the stream now, and we'll